that they were quite aware of the law on certain matters. She's supposed to be married by now. She's convinced Halbrand is Sauron.
Theo. Theo is Sauron. Disa is also Sauron.
Yeah.
Also Galadriel.
Galadriel
Did you know?
is Sauron, and so is Beric. Beric is Sauron.
Beric.
I'm enjoying everything about the show except when Gil-galad opens his mouth. I mean, that's the textbook Sauron. Oh no, I didn't actually mean for this to be true.
Say goodbye to the elves.
I want them to mine Mithril, even though I know what happens.
Her mom actually does have lice in her beard.
We do know the lore. And a massive beard and insanely disheveled hair.
Is it really Elendil and Valendil? Just the apple, which is not going to feed that big fella. He went that way. If you harm a hair on their foot, and I got goosebumps. I got them right now too.
I don't dislike her as much anymore.
If a leaf woke him up, then he's a very light sleeper. I'm about to sneeze.
Yeah.
Welcome to Across the Sundering Seas. I'm Nathan Dewberry.
And I'm Zach Hudspeth. In this episode, we will talk about The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Episode 7, The Eye.
We are joined by James Tauber, the creator of the Digital Tolkien Project, and all-around Tolkien scholar. So come on, or otherwise, we'll be here all day.
I'm James Tauber, head of the Digital Tolkien Project. I've been involved with the use of computers to better understand texts and languages for decades, and recently have been applying those techniques to a better understanding of the works of Tolkien.
What got you connected to the whole world of Tolkien? When did you pick up your first book?
The Hobbit, when I was 11 years old, was the first book I read and of Tolkien, and it was my favorite book at the time. I must have made it known to family members that it was my favorite book because for my 12th birthday, my aunt bought me Return of the King. And I knew that was the third volume of Lord of the Rings and wasn't going to be able to dive right into it, knowing I'd need to read Fellowship first. But instead of going out and trying to buy Fellowship or rent it from the library, I instead dove into the appendices that were at the back of Return of the King, and I actually fell in love with them and postponed reading Fellowship for what turned out to be about 15 years. I became fascinated by what was described in the appendices. I went and bought Robert Foster's Complete Guide to Middle-earth, which just had a new edition come out in the last month or two. And then I decided I need to read the Silmarillion. So I tried to read the Silmarillion as a 12-year-old, failed miserably. I don't think I got much further than the Ainulindale, but was still fascinated by it all. I wanted to know more about the Ainulindale, and so I started buying any volumes of the history of Middle-earth that talked about the Ainulindale. So I remember, I think volume 4 of History of Middle-earth, the Shaping of Middle-earth, had just come out, and I bought that. So I often remark that I have probably the most unusual reading history of anyone in Tolkien because I was reading History of Middle-earth before I'd even read Lord of the Rings. I did finally read Lord of the Rings when the Peter Jackson films came out, but it was fun because by that stage I already knew a lot of the first age and second age legendarium. But yeah, no, I was just a fan for a long time. And then, as I mentioned, my sort of background is in linguistics and the use of computers in understanding particularly historical language texts. So things like ancient Greek and Old English and so on. And it was about 2018 that it occurred to me that the sorts of things I was doing with Homer and the Old Testament and things like that could be done with the texts of Tolkien as well. People often remark that there's a depth to Tolkien and everything that reminds them of works like Homer and the Old Testament. And so I thought, well, why not actually work on sort of computational analysis and ways of dealing with the text on computer in the same way that those texts are treated. And so that led to the creation of the Digital Tolkien Project.
The Peter Jackson films come out 20 years ago. What was your impression of those films?
Fellowship in particular was absolutely incredible to me. It still is far and away my favorite of all of the films. I went and saw it at the cinema 9 times, I think, in its initial run, including a couple of times where I would see it twice a day and on consecutive days and so on. I was just absolutely stunned by it. It just had such an impact on me. Being able to see so many of these places for the first time, see them in the way that they were portrayed in the Peter Jackson films. I Fellowship in particular just still is had such an impact on me and still does. I think it's wonderful.
What were your thoughts on a new adaptation in the form of a TV show?
I think it was in 2019 when Amazon released those maps. And that was actually probably one of the most fun experiences I've ever had online. I think that was still to this day the best thing they did from a marketing perspective. Because if you recall, they started off with a completely empty map. They just tweeted, and I'm guessing other social media too, but I saw it on Twitter, completely empty map. Turns out John Howard had drawn it, but we didn't know that at the time. And then 9 days later, I think it was, because they were following an interesting sequence of 9 days and then 7 days and then 3 days and so on, mirroring the number of rings of power. They released a second map and it just had a handful of names on it. And they were not the names you would normally expect. If you were going to put just 6 names down on a map of Middle Earth, they were not the names you would choose. And each reveal of a map just added new names, and they were intriguing, the choices, in as much just not only what they included, but what they did not include. And so there was all this speculation online about when is this set, given the names. They were choosing interesting names for places, older names in many cases. And so there was a lot of speculation that maybe this was going to be about the Second Age. And then, of course, the final map reveal had Numenor on it, settling once and for all that it was going to be in the Second Age. And there was also, there was speculation even then about exactly how much of the text Amazon had the rights to, because there were places mentioned on the maps that did not occur in the text of Lord of the Rings. In particular, Ras Morthul, is only mentioned in the text of Unfinished Tales, but it was on the map. And so there was a lot of excitement there. That means they've got Unfinished Tales. And so it was fun. There was a lot of speculation then about how you would tell the Second Age story over a number of seasons. And for those 4 years, I guess it was, that we knew so little other than the maps, it was a lot of fun discussing with people online various theories about what could possibly be covered and how they might treat the whole Second Age.
Now we have seen 7 episodes. Where are you at? What are your thoughts so far?
I'm really enjoying the show. I've had to come to terms with things that, I haven't loved, mostly relating to certain unusual choices in relation to the lore. But as a general rule, I've loved it. I still think there's a lot of things that remain to be seen, and so could work out well, not work out so well. One of the things that I've enjoyed is there've been multiple times in the first 7 episodes where they have made it clear, despite what some critics had anticipated, that they were quite aware of the law on certain matters. So for a long time, once we knew about Arondir and Bronwyn, just from previews and so on, there were people saying, don't they realize that that's such a rare thing to have happen? Clearly they don't know the law. And then right in the first, I can't remember if it was episode 1 or episode 2, we got a line right away where one of the elves is saying to Arondir, this has only happened twice. Do you really think this could happen? And I thought, okay, so they to that extent they know what they're doing. And of course, in episode 7, we got the same thing with the mention of Celeborn. Right, there'd been such concern that people were saying she's supposed to be married by now. They've got it completely wrong. Well, guess what? They didn't get it completely wrong. She is married. Now you could, there's lots still to quibble with, but I think there's a lesson in those two instances that we have to wait and see for some things. There are some things. I'm sure there are some things that I didn't like that will never get sorted out. But I still, the whole mithril connection to the Silmarils and the fading of the elves by spring kind of things still bother me. But I think in a lot of cases they're showing that once you keep, if you keep watching, they do resolve some of these issues in fairly satisfactory ways. And I have to say, from a acting point of view, it's been phenomenal. The cinematography I absolutely love. It's just so refreshing to see such a colorful palette these days. I've really enjoyed some of the cinematography choices there, which of course ties in with the production design as well, just the costumes and everything. There's a lot to like and enjoy just watching the show and listening to it. And of course, the music as well is something that a lot of people have, including myself, have really loved about the show.
Episode 6 ends with water being poured into the mountain, and the mountain erupts. And, I've known, we've known, you've known, everybody's known that the Southlands were Mordor.
Yep.
Right? But my father-in-law is a casual viewer of all of Lord of the Rings. He did not realize until the text went up and the name changed to Mordor at the end of episode 7 that that's where we are.
Yep.
He is a casual viewer, and I think sometimes we forget that there are casual viewers. Not everybody goes and sees the Fellowship of the Rings 9+ times in theater.
Right.
Not everybody reads the books. Not everybody knows the lore. So while we're upset about the Mithril and everything, there are people that are just like, oh yeah, the Mithril. There was that. Even if they remember anything about Mithril, they just remember Frodo was wearing it at one point.
I've been watching it with my wife, who has seen the Peter Jackson movies a couple of times at most, has never read the books. And it's been really interesting seeing her insights. She's convinced Halbrand is Sauron. She thinks the stranger is Gandalf. And it's sort of interesting because she doesn't have any. I'm thinking through, well, hang on a sec, Gandalf's not supposed to be there till the third age, blah, 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 blah. Now, she's seeing it completely differently. She's just seeing he's so Gandalf-like in his actions and his movements and so on. And that's a really fun perspective to see through.
I think the point of that is they know there's casual viewers. And so they're putting the Gandalf type character in so that I relate to it. They put, the Hobbit like characters of Sam, Frodo, Merry, Pippin in there so we relate to it. But I mean, the truth is, the stranger is Sauron. Halbrand is Sauron. Theo is Sauron. Disa is also Sauron.
Yeah. Also Galadriel.
Galadriel is Sauron, and so is Beric. Beric is Sauron.
Beric is Sauron, for sure. Well, there was there are a lot of people that were hoping for a while that Gil-galad was Sauron and the real Gil-galad was sort of tied up in a basement and somewhere, and that's why he was speaking such nonsense. There was a time, I think it was after episode 5, that I remarked that I'm enjoying everything about the show except when Gil-galad opens his mouth, because it just so happened that everything that I was having a problem with was coming from him. But we'll see what happens there. I think episode 8 is going to be interesting in that regard. I think we are going to get some resolution. I don't know if we're going to get much. I think they need to. I think there's some mystery boxes that they do need to open up by the end of episode 8. So I'm hoping we'll get some resolution to that stuff.
I'm hoping we do as well, but I kind of want to just be mad about it. And so, because I want this to drag on for a long time. And so if you tell me exactly who Sauron is, then I already know. And we got 4 more seasons, and I'm sure a great story can be done. I think how it's going to end is they're going to reveal Sauron to us, or let us think we know who Sauron is, and in the first minute of season 2, it's going to be disproven that is Sauron.
You know, when you think, okay, we don't know if it's going to be option A or option B, option A or B, which is it going to be? And then it all of a sudden turns out to be mystery option C. I think that's probably going to happen. And I've speculated that on the question of Halbrand being Sauron, that people who think he is and people that think he isn't will be arguing with each other for months after the show about who was right. Because I think we're going to get some indication that to some extent, in some sense, Halbrand was Sauron, but maybe not in a completely satisfying Halbrand equals Sauron thing. I don't know if that has anything to do with, Adar's choice of the word split when describing what he did to Sauron or what. But I suspect it's not going to be a straightforward, this character equals Sauron resolution.
Yeah, even with the tunnels, I mean, I had no idea that the tunnels were going to be used in that fashion. So it's going to be like one of those things. You think these tunnels are used for transportation, and then all of a sudden, no, they're used to make Mordor.
Yeah, exactly.
We're just going to be twisted and turned.
I don't know anyone who actually thinks Halbrand is the true king of the Southland. It was just accepted too readily by people that he was the true, and they always use that word true, the true king of the Southlands, as if to emphasize the fact that he's not. And I've always wondered, right from the moment that we meet him, whether he's one of these characters that says something initially that then it turns out to be you think is false, and then much later on you find out no, what he said first was actually true. So when he says, for example, that he got the pouch off a dead man, and then Galadriel kind of says to him, no, you're actually really the king, and he goes, yeah, I actually really am, sort of thing. I suspect he did get that off that pouch off a dead man.
He even says, when you find out what I've done, you're all going to turn on me.
Also, I mean, there's that moment in the prison with Galadriel where he makes a suggestion to her about how you dominate people. And it's so textbook Sauron. When he says you find their weakness, and she goes, then you exploit it. He goes, no. You give them the means to master it, and then you can master them. And that's textbook Sauron. And yes, maybe it's misdirection, but if Halbrand is not Sauron, he better be somebody really interesting.
Episode 7 opens with the shot of Galadriel's eye, and then her armor, and she is covered in dust.
I thought it was done extremely well from a sound design point of view, from visually, this gradual broadening and awareness of the situation, which I am led to believe is quite realistic, that you sort of start off with this real tunnel vision and then you pick up what's going on in the environment around you. I was amazed to discover from some behind the scene shots that that was not done that color was not done in grading. that they actually lit it that color in principal photography, and yeah, I mean, it was a stunning scene and shocking in some respects, because we saw the burning horse, we saw people burning. Galadriel seemed disoriented and not particularly focused initially on helping people. I think it did a really amazing job of conveying the whole the confusion around a situation like that. I mean, we knew it was coming from I mean, this is part of the problem with these shots getting made available so far in advance. You kind of know these things are coming. Although I remember when we first saw shots of Galadriel with the orange, there was all sorts of speculation. Is this a first stage flashback? Which Battle of Beleriand is this? So it was kind of fun to realize that, no, this is actually a second age thing, the result of Mount Doom's explosion. But there were some lovely moments in that whole scene. I loved seeing Muriel being willing to go in and rescue people. And yeah, I mean, it was a really, really shocking, but I don't want to say fun. Fun's the wrong word. It was a well done scene, I'll say.
Yeah, we were talking before about how you could get caught up in, like, how do they lose each other so quickly and how do they split up so quickly when they're all in that one little village. But I think the way that they shoot it really points to that, how like jarring and how she gets up so disoriented and so confused. And you're right, like she's not really thinking about other people. She happens upon Theo, but she's not really thinking about other people. And so the way that they shoot it and convey it kind of lends to them all being so confused and end up being split up in the end.
We then see Isildur, and he sees Valindiel, and he's trapped under a hut, a structure of sorts. And the queen walks by, and he gets help from the queen.
I think everyone knew that one of the friends was going to die here. And so I think they set that up quite well. This question of, whether it was Valandil, and then it turned out to be Ontamo, which, especially when you go back and look at some of the conversations with Ontamo, is particularly sad. That it in some senses it had to be him, because remember, he was the one in episode 6 that said that he's done with fighting now. He's had enough for a lifetime, and he's going to just stay in the village and help them rebuild, kind of thing.
You remember when they were back in Numenor and his fiance was there, and he was like, it's all going to be over before we get there.
Yep.
And he was just kind of blowing it off. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't making it back.
Yep.
Yeah. And Valandil, like when he's under the like burning piece of whatever it was, he's like, Ontamo, where's Ontamo? He was with me. And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh man, yeah. Ontamo, he's done.
The way they roll out some of the gore is unusual for me with Lord of the Rings, with the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, right from that early episode where the throat gets cut, the elf's throat gets cut, I've been quite shocked by some of the gore we've seen. So much of the fighting is individual. We're really seeing individual, including orcs, individuals get hurt or get killed, as opposed to sort of just being cannon fodder where you just see 20 orcs knocked down in one go. You actually see an individual orc get a limb cut off or an arrow to the chest or whatever. It's been quite different, as you say, from perhaps what we're used to in the franchise.
The queen and Isildur, they go into this building that the roof's about to collapse, and a part of the roof falls, and ashes and fire get in the queen's eyes, and then she gets out. But we're led to believe Isildur did not make it. What were you screaming at the TV when that happened?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because we of course, those people that have read the books all know the connection between the Lord of the Rings films and this, know that Isildur has to survive. Although coming back to sort of our discussion about casual viewers, it's not, I don't think many casual viewers would necessarily make that connection. And so there are going to be plenty of viewers that suspect Isildur is dead. But even for those of us who know that he can't possibly be dead, what they do later on with it in terms of Elendil's reaction is remarkable. I think that's the point, right? That it doesn't matter that we know he survived. The fact that there are so many people now that characters in the show that think he's dead, and the impact that has on them questioning the decisions they'd made and everything like that. And again, this comes back to just some of the remarkable acting in the show. The way
Elendil has obviously, I mean, he's taken a heel turn as a character in development because of thinking that Isildur is dead, and even the suspense in the films when you think Aragorn's dead,
Yep.
Just the film or the suspense that's surrounding those moments still does. It leads characters to do things and
Right.
build their character in different ways.
The scene then cuts from gloom and doom to dumb and happy. And we're with the Harfoots, and they're excited about getting to the grove. And one of them says, the others must have started baking already. They can smell something burning. And they're just happy to get up the hill.
I was so worried at that point because this is not a prediction so much as a concern I had. I one of the things that I do is teach a class at Signum University on Rings of Power, and I all of a sudden in class the week before had this horrible realization: what if the tail end of the Harfoots gets to a point and discovers that the volcano has wiped out the rest of the Harfoots? That was my concern. It wasn't a prediction, but it was, oh no, I hope they don't do that. And so when those lines were spoken, I'm like, oh no, I didn't actually mean for this to be true. That was my worry, that actually the volcano had taken out the rest of the.
And they were the only ones
Harfoots.
left.
Yeah,
that was
my
vice
concern.
versa. Yeah. That would have been crazy. Yeah, that would have been crazy.
It pans out, and we see that the rocks from the eruption have destroyed the grove. And their food, the apples, they're burnt to a crisp. There's no food left. And Sadek asks the stranger to fix it. And we get this intense scene where the stranger says, Aquita, Invignata, and Lotna. Do you know what these words mean?
So they're all Quenya words. He says 4 things. They're all essentially commands, and three of them consist of a Quenya particle "are," which is how you turn a verb into an imperative, how you turn a verb into a command. And so the first one is "kiuta," which means to sort of refresh or heal. So saying "akiuta" is an instruction to heal. And then he says "invignata." Invignata is a really interesting word because we find it, or a related word, in one of the titles for Aragorn. One of the titles for Aragorn is Enviatar, which means the renewer. And this is the same thing. This is the underlying verb, to renew. And so it's a command to renew. Then he says Lotena. Na, this is a little different. In that lotte is a noun. It means a flower. We get it in various words to do with even Fingalotte, Earendil's ship, which literally means foam flower, has that lotte in it. But lotte na is an instruction to basically, I want you to flower, be a flower kind of thing. And then it ends with Arcuta, which is an instruction to live. We actually find a similar, or find that verb in the Aglario part of Return of the King, when they're praising the halflings, and they say that they wish them a long life, or to live for a long time. That same verb is used there. So it's kind of fun. We get these Quenya examples that half of them do appear in Lord of the Rings in completely different ways, but they're instructions to the tree, much like we saw Arondir early on speak Quenya to the tree, where he asks the tree for forgiveness when he's about to cut it down. Here we see the stranger basically commanding the tree to be renewed, to flower, to live, which of course it does. He's successful.
I loved Mava asked him, what's he muttering? And Sadek says, likely little words so the tree will understand. And she says, yes. Sadek, trees don't talk. And he says, some do. It goes from him kind of muttering to him screaming at the tree. The limb falls on Dilly and Nori, and the look that the stranger gives, he's scared and still confused about what's going on. Even though he's picked up on a lot, he's still confused.
How useful has your digital resources, how useful has that been, especially like watching this show, being able to, search these Quenya words or different things that are going on in the show? Has that been an incredibly useful tool during this show?
There's some things that have come up. One of the more interesting things is just quickly being able to check whether a particular word or name of something appears in the text just in Lord of the Rings or if it's from elsewhere. So one of the things that came up early on was Armenelos, the capital of Numenor, is mentioned. And I had this sneaking suspicion that Armenelos was not mentioned in Lord of the Rings. And so it was very easy to do those kind of searches. One of the things, I'll just give you a sort of sneak preview. I have the subtitle files for the show. Well, up to episode 7. I get them after the fact, not beforehand. So I'm in the process actually of building a search engine that will not only enable searching of the spoken words in the TV show, but also ability to do analysis between that and the text. So the ability to find what phrases, for example, that are used in the TV show actually come from the book and so on.
We then get to visit Khazad-dûm, and Elrond is pleading with the King Durin to let them mine Mithril to save the elves. There are a few things I liked about this scene. One of them being when they spoke in the Dwarvish language, and Elrond responded back to them, and then the king was impressed. And then the little look that Durin gave his father, I was like, oh man, they're gonna let him mine Mithril. Here we go. And then he dismisses everybody from the room and says, the elves' time has come. No one can cheat death. Say goodbye to the elves.
Here's what's crazy about this storyline is that I want them to mine Mithril, even though I know what happens.
If Durin would have just listened to his father, we could have saved a lot of heartache here.
Yeah.
But I want Durin to get his way. I don't know why.
I think that's part of it, that you really side with Prince Durin in this debate. I love the fact that we've seen such complexity in the dwarves. It's one of my favorite things about this adaptation is that we're not just getting this sort of monoculture of dwarves, all being greedy or whatever. We're seeing this sort of nuance, particularly in the relationship between King Durin and Prince Durin. And just the acting there and the writing there's been phenomenal. Any scene that the Durins or Disa or Elrond are in has been wonderful.
After he argues with his father for a minute, it cuts to him talking to his wife, and Disa is mad, and she calls his father lice bearded.
Yep.
And Durin admits he's not willing to go against his father, and Disa then apologizes, saying she's sorry for what she said, and that she doesn't like it when Durin heaps slag on her mother, and then he says that her mom actually does have lice in her beard.
Yes.
Which I like the line. We've had an argument on this show about women dwarves not having beards, and we've had an argument in our comments section on one of our episodes that went about 20 comments deep and about 15 pages worth of information. Here we're finding that Disa's mom may in fact have a beard, and maybe Disa chooses not to have a beard.
Right. Maybe
that's another one of those moments that you're talking like Disa doesn't have a beard, but like you're talking about, eventually they come back and they approach it at another angle that's like, no, we do know the lore. We do.
Exactly.
And here's a moment of that.
And then Elrond comes in, and he and Durin lock eyes, and they don't even have to say anything to each other. Elrond knows it didn't go well, just don't by the look on Durin's face. And Durin says, so this is goodbye then. And Elrond says, we do not say goodbye, we say Nama. And then Durin finishes it by saying Namarie. And then he says that means go towards goodness. Have you broken those words down yet?
It's interesting. At first I was kind of like, really? Does it mean that? Because it's most simply just means be well. It's the na in Namarie is the same na in what the stranger says to the tree when he says lote na. It's a way of saying be something. In this case, in the case of Namarie, be well. But John Garth actually pointed out to me that in some unpublished notes of Tolkien, well, they're now published in Parma El Delambra and Volume 17. He does actually have an Tolkien does have an alternative gloss for Numaria that is more along the lines of go towards goodness. So I think it's I stand corrected on that point. I think it's a reasonable interpretation of the meaning of that.
Made for a beautiful scene between the two of them.
I mean, the scenes between the two of them are always incredible. One thing I will say is that there's a lot of times in this show where the acting is just done incredibly through the eyes alone. And I think one of the best examples of that is Owain Arthur's portrayal of Prince Durin. There's so many times where he's just conveying sadness and anger and just through his eyes, even though he's got all these prosthetics on. That's what's sort of remarkable about it, is that he can still act so emotionally with his eyes, despite the fact he's got all this stuff stuck on his face
and a massive beard and insanely disheveled hair. And he really does. You're so right.
One thing that struck me in this was Durin was beside himself, tearing up and crying, which made me tear up and cry as well. And Elrond is just kind of stoic about it. It kind of proves, like, because elves are not really supposed to fear death and all of this, right? And so it just shows that he's resolved with what's happening. And if we can find a way, we'll find a way. And I don't think he thinks it's over yet either. Then a part that after this part, all I tweeted was, people are going to be mad about this. Elrond leaves, and Durin slides the mithril across the table. It lands next to the leaf and instantly heals the leaf.
I don't have a problem with that. And I if that was the extent, I mean, obviously people are mad because it means that there is some truth to the whole weirdness about it doesn't mean there's any truth about the fading, and it doesn't, of the elves, and it doesn't mean there's any truth about the Balrog fighting the elf with the Silmaril tree, lost Silmaril in the tree. So those two things could still be completely made up. And they're the two things I have the biggest problem with. So the idea that mithril may have that kind of effect, we don't know what's causing the problem with the rotting of the leaf to start with. So I think until we know that, I don't think we can too quickly rule out the idea that mithril might be able to help with that.
We're then cut back to the Southlands with Theo and Galadriel wandering, trying to get to the encampment. And we're getting a lot of emotion out of Theo. And I think we get a lot of Galadriel growth in this episode.
Yes, remarkably so. And Galadriel saying things to Theo that she probably needed to be told herself in the previous episode, right? It's remarkable, the turnaround, yeah.
Yeah, there's that moment she says to Theo, "It's over." And then he says, "Not for me. I won't allow it." And she says, "We must." And then she says it again. And you could see the way she acted. That was incredible. She goes, "We must." And then she's like, "We must." Like you said, she's saying it to herself in that moment.
One of the things I like that she says, it darkens the heart to call dark deeds good. It gives place for evil to thrive inside of us. And I think it's an important line because we're still unsure about Theo.
Mm-hmm.
He's done a few things, more than a few things, to make us seem like he's a bad guy, but he didn't go with Waldrig. Right? And then, he gave up the sword for love.
Yep.
I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, it's a bad thing the sword was given up, but their whole story would have been over if he hadn't. And so we're torn which way to go. And so he's being presented with both sides right now. And Galadriel's trying to help steer him to the light, even though her herself, still feels darkness.
Yep.
The queen is found and then at some point is riding on a horse, and she asks a question: how much further until we reach the encampment? And then she almost runs into a branch without moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then she says, how much further until we're clear of this smoke? And Elendil and Valendil. Is it really Elendil and Valendil?
I think, yeah.
Valendil. Yeah, Valendil.
Valendil?
It's their R sounds, yeah. Not, yeah. 2 E sounds and 2 R sounds, yeah.
But we realize that the queen cannot see. And I laughed even the first time I saw this. And Elendil walks up and says, because she says, I see, right? Just like the idiom, I see.
Yep.
And then he puts his hand on her and says, do you?
Yeah.
And that actually made me laugh because it was like they had to spell it out for us. I thought it was pretty clear she was blind. So I liked that. But their face, kind of took me back when we realized she was blind.
Yeah, and that them kind of holding that information back for a couple scenes until that horse scene, like when her and Valandil approach the first time. You don't really get the sense that she's blind.
You could see it in her face, but it was because we thought it was because she was reacting to Isildur.
Yep. Yeah, you could see it when you go back and watch it again. You're like, yep. But
she's struggling already.
First time through, you're like, okay, mate, you don't notice it at all.
We then cut again to Sadik talking to the stranger, and he is sending him on his way to go with other big folk. And Sadik gives him a map of the stars to take with him. And then it pans over, and we can see one little flower starting to bloom. And so we're picking up on that what he did actually worked.
Lotte.
And that he is healing the land here. And then we get Nori, just kind of beaten down Nori. And she realizes something. She says, I'm just a Harfoot, and that's all I'll ever be. And she's saying it as a negative. Whereas we all know that hobbits are incredible creatures. And I know she's going to do something incredible soon along the way here. But when you're a small person, you can feel small sometimes. And so I like the Hobbit storylines throughout all of Tolkien's world because it's the, what doesn't look right with the eye turns out to be the right way. We're then back with Theo and Galadriel, and they're resting. And I noticed in this, I know that the sun went down, but the color temperature is cooler as well, right? And so it's almost like they've kind of found a hideaway, a place where the evil isn't touching as much. And Theo asks her if she's ever lost someone close to her, and she says, "No, yeah, I've lost my brother." And then she pauses and says, "And my husband."
I knew Celeborn was going to show up at some point. It'll get mentioned at least. And I really like the way it was done. There's this wonderful, again, coming back to the amazing acting, there's this tenderness, just momentary, when Galadriel is talking about Celeborn. It's the first time we've seen her smile and sort of light-hearted.
Except for in the slow-mo of her riding
the
horse.
Riding the horse. That's true. That's the only other time. That is the only other time. I didn't really like that shot at all. I like this one a lot more. And she tells the funny story about his armor didn't fit him, and she called him a silver clam. And I love that aspect of it. And then just suddenly, and I never saw him again. And there'd been some criticism from people that, why is this only coming out now? But she has she's gone through so many traumas. It makes sense that she would compartmentalize, that she would be like, I can't even deal with the loss of my husband, so I'm just going to focus on revenge for my brother for now. That's how she's coping, right?
It's a scene that reminded me of Fellowship of the Rings, where the hobbits are trying to get out of the Shire, and they are approached on the road. They get off the road, and they're in the underneath.
Oh yes.
And Theo tries to pull his sword. She stops him. It very much reminded me of that scene,
which is itself mirroring the same scene in the Bakshi film as well. So Peter Jackson took a lot of visual inspiration in that scene from Bakshi, from Ralph Bakshi. But yeah, it seemed obvious to me they were trying for that same sort of tension with the same composition on the screen and everything. Yeah, definitely.
We are then back in Khazad-dûm, and Durin and Elrond have decided to mine for Mithril on their own, and we get a few touching moments here. A few that I liked. I liked that Elrond hinted that he lost the competition early on purpose, and it took Durin a few seconds to get it. He was just a little slow on it. Durin talks about how they have these secret names, and we get this really touching moment where they talk about their secret names you only tell your family, and he went to tell Elrond, and Elrond said, save it till we get to the far side.
Yep.
And so I think there's going to be something there. I think we're going to learn that secret name at some point, and they're just proving that they're brothers. I mean, even later in the show, Durin says he's as close to me as if my own mother bore him.
Which was probably a mistake to say to King Durin, but we'll come to that.
And then it takes them 2 more hits, and they're completely through. So they're the best miners in the world. I get that, you know. But this little hole opens up, and they're able to peer through it, and Mithril for miles is what we can see. And then they are immediately caught, and they kick Durin out of the mountain, and the king and his son have a massive argument.
Yeah.
That ends in the crest being taken from Durin, Prince Durin, and he is no longer Prince Durin in that moment.
That was a really tough scene. And as I said, it was the real trigger for King Durin seemed to be when Prince Durin said he's his brother, like he was in my my mother's womb, sort of thing. That really upset King Durin. And I understand it. I mean, that's a pretty strong thing to say to somebody about their wife and the children that she bore. But yeah, that's it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because he's been de-princed. We've seen them get through arguments before, but this doesn't seem like something they can easily come back from.
And we're back at the Grove. Nori realizes that the Grove has been healed. The stranger did a good job, even though he left not thinking he did. He left with one single apple for his journey. No snails, just the apple, which is not going to feed that big fella. I also liked, it made me laugh a little bit, but in the scene where she handed him the apple, it was very obvious a child's hand.
Yep. And
his hand. It was very obvious. I don't think they've done a great job in this show of giving us that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's been, while in in the movies, the Peter Jackson films, it felt easier. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
This feels a little more forced for some reason.
I think in the scenes with the what are they called? The mystics with the mystics. The perspective I think comes across a little bit more natural in those scenes later on.
I agree.
But yeah, I do agree that it's felt a little forced in the other scenarios.
So one thing I noticed when they started gathering food, because they had the food, they gathered a lot, and they kept showing people bringing people food and then just kind of storing a lot. And it reminded me of the Israelites wandering the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And God provided manna, and they were only to get what they needed for the day.
Yep.
And if you didn't, there was consequences. I kind of saw a little parallelism there between those stories. Did you pick up on any of that?
I hadn't until you mentioned it, but I think there's definitely merit in that. Yeah.
And it comes back to bite them in the butt.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's probably the most awful part. I mean, there were amongst a lot of awful moments in the last couple of episodes, this was the one that got me the most.
We cut to nightfall, and Nori and Poppy watch them go to the tree, and they figure out which way the stranger went. Nori knows that they know which ways he's going, and she can't allow it to happen. So she jumps out of hiding, confronts them, and tells lies and says he went that way, not that way. And then when she turns back around, they're gone. And then the hand just comes in, and they take something out of her hair. And, she turns around, she yells at them, and then her dad, Largo, comes out. And do you remember what Largo said?
I don't remember. No,
He said, if you harm a hair on their foot,
that's right. That's right. I do remember that.
that he'll brain them, which he was willing to fight for his daughter. So
Yeah.
the bravery of hobbits comes out again, and the mystic just covers the torch and then burns their life to the ground.
Just how casual, how wanton that was. That's what really got me, was that if they just put out the torch or something, right, that would have been enough. But no, we're going to destroy it just casually. Yeah. Flick of our hand, we're going to destroy absolutely everything.
So then we leave and we're back at the refugee camp, and Elendil is there with Beric, and he's, trying to control him, and he says, "You're coming home with me." Because he just wants to hold on to something. He's a father that's grieving. And Beric says, "No, I am Sauron." No, he doesn't say that. Beric says no, and we're reminded that there's a connection between rider and horse.
Yep.
And, that gives the casual viewer as well a sense of hope that maybe there's something Beric needs to go find. And then we get to see him run free.
They'd set up the connection that exists between Beric and Isildur. This is going to be the payoff of that. We're probably going to see something that looks an awful lot like Aragorn being returned on horseback. That wouldn't surprise me.
So then Galadriel goes to meet with the Queen, and we find out they're planning an exit from Middle-earth to go back to Numenor, and we just think they're licking their wounds and going home. And Galadriel, she's sad. She tells them that she's sad she got them into this situation. And the Queen feels her face. For a second, I thought the Queen was going to slap her. But she doesn't. She says, "Do not spend your pity on me, elf. Save it for our enemies." And I got goosebumps. I got them right now, too. When she said, "Save it for our enemies, for they do not know what they have begun." And I wrote here just yes in all caps with an exclamation point. And she vows to return with more army. That really fired me up for a fight. We then go to my favorite scene of the entire episode. One of my favorite for the whole season. We cut back to the Harfoots, and they're cleaning up, and Largo gives a rousing speech. And at the end of that speech, Nori decides she's going to go off by herself and warn the stranger. And Poppy says she's going to. Then Marigold says she's going. And then Malva says that Sadoc should go as well. You have been very harsh on Malva.
I have. She. There's been a lot of heel turns in characters in this episode, and I will say she made a heel turn. She did make a heel turn. So I don't dislike her as much anymore. She's turned around.
What were your thoughts on the speech? Did it strike a chord with you? Because I cried.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and it gets to the heart of you were saying about the importance of the little people in Tolkien, and that being such an important part of certainly Lord of the Rings. And I think it captured that sense really well. And yeah, we're talking about heel turns. We're starting to see more and more of the Harfoots being willing to break out of their, you stick to the path kind of rules, to say, no, we actually going to care for one another, even if it means straying from the path.
My favorite 3 lines come back to back to back here. Sadoc says, "I'm coming with you. It doesn't matter anyway. We're all gonna die."
So we get the Sam illusion with the "I'm coming with you," right?
Yeah.
That's a wonderful Sam illusion. But then, yeah, we're all gonna die. That was fun.
And then he says, "Come on, otherwise we'll be here all day." And then Norris asks if he thinks they'll be able to find the stranger, and Sadoc says, "He's a bloody giant. How could we miss him?" And then we're back with Galadriel, Arondir, and Bronwyn. and they're discussing where they're going to go and take all of the people from the Southlands. And Bronwyn says they're going to an old Númenorian colony by the mouth of Anduin.
Yep.
Called
Pelargir.
Where is that? And is that have any significance?
So I was actually slightly surprised that it got mentioned, because one of the casualties of the timeline changes is the sort of gradual progression of Númenorian colonization of Middle-earth. And one of the things that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out is what events that in the books were done by previous kings and queens of Númenor are actually just going to happen in this generation. And so it was interesting when Pelargir was mentioned. I was slightly surprised because I off the top of my head can't think exactly when it was founded, but it certainly was founded by Númenorians who were at least eventually of a faithful persuasion rather than a kingsman persuasion. So the fact that it already exists means that there must have been some kind of colonization going on earlier with previous kings. So that was in queens. That was an interesting revelation. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
We also find out that Halbrand is alive in this scene.
Very suspicious, right? Halbrand's been missing the whole time. All of a sudden, he shows up with a peculiar injury that only elf medicine can heal.
And they found him on the road.
Yeah, exactly. Like, who did he encounter? How did he get that injury? It's very, very suspicious.
Yep. And then they pretty much say that he's septic.
Yep.
And they have to go visit the elves. And then he climbs onto a horse. And I haven't looked at the map, but it's hundreds of miles, I think, away.
Yep.
And I think they're being very liberal with the time and movements. It takes as long as it needs to take for Waldrig to get from the village to back to the tower, right?
Yeah.
Arondir as well. He, all these movements. I think they're being very liberal with it, just making it work for the story.
It's interesting because I think on the one hand, it's frustrating given the amount of effort Tolkien went into working all this stuff out, right? Tolkien cared about moon phases and exactly how long it would take to go from A to B, and rewrote sections over and over again until he got the timing right. And he's like, well, hang on a sec. If Sam and Frodo are here at that point, then and then looking at the phase of the moon, that's got to be the same moon phase as when these characters, he cared about that sort of stuff. So on the one hand, it's a shame, but I don't know how else you could do it and be good television. I think it would be impossible to have realistic travel times and it be an enjoyable TV show to watch.
We then cut again back to the mine, back to Khazad-dûm, and Disa is livid. And she tells him that one day this will all be yours and we will dig.
She goes fully Lady Macbeth.
And then we see the king put the leaf in the hole and tell him to seal it up. And the leaf is just tumbling down, settles
a long way.
A very long way. It better be a very long way. It settles on the ground and then burns up. And we get to see our favorite Balrog at the bottom of this mine.
When we saw it in the trailer, there were 4 possibilities I suggested. One was that it was a first age flashback. That's no longer true. We're in the second age, right? It's possible that it's not Durin's Bane, it's a second Balrog, but what are the chances of there being 2 Balrogs in Khazad-dûm? So it's almost certainly Durin's Bane. The question is he going to stay hidden from this point until 2/3 of the way through the third age? That seems unlikely to me. Why show him? Just in terms of setting up Easter eggs or fun things for Lord of the Rings readers or watchers to enjoy, they've gone to too much trouble already to show it this early on.
And he's certainly not asleep. He If a leaf woke him up, then he's a very light sleeper.
There's two possibilities. One is that they stick to the timeline, and whoever finds him doesn't live to tell the tale, and so the official story is that he's been asleep the whole time. The other possibility is that they're bringing in this third age element into the second age, which I'm hoping. Well, it's not that big a deal if they do it. I would rather they didn't. But that's another possibility, that they are going to try to incorporate the Durin's Bane causing the fall of Khazad-dûm into this show
from a narrative point, giving it the climax instead of just the closing. Yeah, and I'm with you. It doesn't. It feels like it should wait. I mean, a couple seasons at least before that happens. So it's interesting that we're seeing this right now, but I hope that it waits at least a little while before things like that start paying off.
There's so many endings to this episode.
And then
it's like a Peter Jackson movie.
And then the real ending, we're back in the Southlands, and Waldrig, chants, "Hail Adar, Lord of the Southlands," and Adar sits down and says, "No," and then doesn't name the new name itself.
Mm-hmm.
And they put the word on the screen, Southlands, and then burn it away, and it says Mordor. And for me, it was really cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
But for my father-in-law, was what he needed. For the casual viewer, he went, "Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Wait, that's the mountain."
That would have been an incredible moment for the casual viewer. Yeah.
I do agree. It felt a little cheesy. But the framing and the shot and then the burning away and that reveal, I think for a lot of viewers is like the full realization of what is going on.
I thought it was cheesy too, but so would him using the name Mordor have been. That would have bothered me too, because he wouldn't have called it. I don't know that he would have called it that. This is again something that Tolkien puts a lot of care into. Is what do different people call the thing? So Sauron probably did not call himself Sauron. Sauron is a name that would have, same with Morgoth. It's a name that the enemy gave, his enemies gave him. And so him all of a sudden deciding to call it Mordor would have seemed a bit odd, given that's the Elvish name, what the name the elves gave to it. So either way, it would have, I think, been a bit cheesy.
All in all, I thought the episode was a good setup to a finale.
Yes.
I honestly thought that episode 6 could have been a finale in itself. And we could have started with episode 7 as season 2. But it's not what we got. I feel like we got some great television. And I'm very excited to see what happens in the next episode. So there's going to be 4 more seasons after this season.
Yep.
And it's going to be over years, right? The next season, season 2, will not come out until for 2 years. I'm about to sneeze.
Yeah.
So there's going to be 4 more seasons, and season 2 won't come out for 2 more years. What is there beauty in that? And what are you kind of hoping gets built out of a new franchise that's going to be like drug out over 6-7 years? What are your hopes for the franchise?
The 2 years is going to be tough, I think. We've gone through that. A couple of people that watch Game of Thrones, people that watch Westworld, both had to at various points deal with two years between seasons, and it's tough because you do forget things. Although plenty of rewatchability. It's going to be interesting actually if there are twists revealed in episode 8. What impact does that have on the rewatchability of the show? Will there be parts that are just too frustrating to watch because we know what the truth of it is, or will it actually be really fun to go back and watch? The thing that excites me most, though, about all of this is that it bring people back to the books. So I'm really hoping that this has, for casual watchers who've never read the books, to people that have maybe read Lord of the Rings but have never read the Silmarillion or whatever, that they now have sort of that additional incentive to dive into it more.
Our hope is that you're not bogged down by talking to us for this long, because
Not at all.
We love getting to talk to you for this long.
Yeah. So for me, like I really don't have a lot of people I can just sit down and talk a full episode and go like line by line if I really wanted to. But with, like, once I get you on here, it's hard for you to like say, okay, I'm done. And hit go, you know?
Which you could, you absolutely could, and it's
not at all.
It's so kind and gracious of you to spend time with us like this.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching or listening to our podcast. If you want to hear from other Tolkien scholars or maybe an actor from the show, be sure to check out our past episodes. You can find us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Once again, thank you for joining us as we venture across the sundering seas. We do not say goodbye. We say Namarie.